I am really privileged to count the nature guy as my personal friend. Everybody else here know who the nature guy is? Dr. Gordon Atkins, the naturalist at Camp Sabo, also known as the nature guy. And one of the things you begin to wonder is that he loves nature, but did his love for God create in him a deeper love for nature, or was there something reflexive going on that his love for nature allowed him easy access to love nature's God? And certainly if you have any time, you can sort him out, search him out on YouTube. He tells little nature nuggets. And in that motif of worshiping God through an appreciation of nature, I have entitled this Sabbath Hours message, Life is Beautiful. Life is beautiful. And it's beautiful because nature's God designed it to be so. And I wanted to say something that just slipped my mind. I'm sure it'll come to me. But this is a part of a series of, oh yes, you know, over the last 7 or so messages, we did a lot of introspection. We did a lot of heart searching. Is there anything in my life that would keep the Holy Spirit from moving in and dwelling in my body temple with freedom and with power? And so that was sort of we might say, a heavy message. This is a little lighter message. The challenge, however, is to, as we contemplate these wonders of creation, that we ask God to expand our capacity for joy and for gratitude for what he's done. And so as we get into this, we find that David the psalmist, who was an outdoors young man, he is saying, one thing I've desired of the Lord, and that one thing I will seek. I'm a man of one purpose, singleness of motive, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. And so I don't know if he considered all of nature the house of the Lord, but it begins to me shape a spiritual sensibility to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. And so we begin outdoors in nature, but we begin to look for in nature the God of nature. And nature isn't the temple of God until we see him there, his wisdom there, his love for there. And we might say also he's not denigrating formal religion, because remember, in his life, the supreme object of his life was to renew and create a magnificent temple to the Lord. And so we have here the building up of the idea of worship in the life to fulfill the life. And it starts with understanding the beauty of the Lord. And that is revealed in how life is flourishing according to God's design. And the supreme object of beauty is to be found in holiness. Holiness is not meant to be something that is so far away that only angels get to participate in holiness. And of course, reading my Bible through, it always engaged me how alien heaven's worship was from me, because I was a perennial ADD, HD, whatever, especially on hot summer days. My grandmother would get me a wool suit for Christmas, and by July it was too hot, but that's what I was supposed to wear. And the varnish would soften under I would start sticking to the pew. Anybody remember that? You stick to the pew, and I would just be fidgeting, all itchy, scratchy. And I loved the Lord, but I couldn't wait for the sermon to be over because it was torture. But now just turn me loose outdoors, and I could spend hours outdoors and not reach fatigue or tiredness. I loved to be out of doors. And so here we find this sort of paradox of a young child. David was was fed the beauty of the Lord in nature, and yet he wanted to be in the temple. And I was sort of the other way around. My dad was a pastor, a multi-church district, and on one Sabbath we went to church twice. On the other Sabbath we went to church 3 times. And so, but fortunately my parents understood my childish limits, and they told my brother and I, on days it wasn't frigid cold, that my brother and I could just sit in the car with the windows rolled down reading a book or something in the church parking lot, and we didn't have to go and sit to the 3rd time through the same sermon, because my dad would preach the same sermon. And so if we heard it twice, that was enough. And so they let us read the junior guide or something else like that instead of going into church. But notice the challenge here in Psalms 96. It's a challenge to worship God with a verve and an awareness that may have been lost, may have been lacking. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Now, one thing I know is that I love old songs. I love old songs. And yet, if I sing an old song too often, including Happy Birthday to You, it gets a little tiresome. And I remember how my conference president had a humorous take on Happy Birthday, which was not in that little lilting Happy Birthday to You, but it was in a minor key, and it was sung at a pace of a funeral dirge. And I just loved that variation. I mean, he was kind of a quirky guy anyway. But the idea is that happiness is in the day, in the connection with people, and you can turn it into a downer if all you think of is that all the wax that's melting on top of your cake, because the candles are counting up by the dozens. You know who I'm talking about. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Something about a fresh song of praise is always welcome if it's a majestic song. And that's why even on Christian music, we have something called the Contemporary Top 40. Christians like new music as well as old songs. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name, tell of his salvation from day to day. If you want to have something to talk about what God has done for you. Talk about the majesty of creation and the miracle of redemption. Talk about the people who don't know about it. Talk about how Jesus has made a difference in your life. All right, has made a difference in mine. So I'm going to say it again. Talk about how Jesus has made a difference in your life. You don't have to say, man, just say, I understand. Because that may not be in an amen mood this morning. But I just say, I understand. I'm not speaking above your head. It's getting to you. You understand what I'm talking about. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the people. So it's not inappropriate to talk to a heathen about God. I know there's some things about politics you're not supposed to talk to strangers, but you can always talk about the goodness of God from a first person to anybody. They might consider you a flaky Jesus freak or whatever else, but it's not inappropriate to talk about how Jesus has made a difference in your life. So do that. It's an exhortation from the Psalms. For great is the Lord. You know, we like to talk about big things. Down in Southwest Michigan, even Adventists root for Notre Dame. It's a funny thing. I don't quite understand that, but I guess it's because Notre Dame has a good football team. But never mind, it's a Catholic institution. It's a Catholic football team predominantly. But even Adventists root for Notre Dame. It's a funny thing. Why? Because of an element of greatness. We like to buy sweatshirts and caps of winners. Okay? And we even advertise for free the products we pay to use. You ever notice that? You buy a shirt that advertises Taco Bell because you like tacos from Taco Bell. You buy a cap that says Chevy, even you had to pay $60,000 for that Chevy to drive it. You just wear their cap. because it's a winner to you. And you know, that's the way it is. For great is the Lord, greatly to be praised. He is to be feared or reverenced above all gods. So that is the focus of our message today, is as a Christian, you don't have to be silent when we're talking about big ideas. You should have a mind and a heart and a life full of big ideas and big realities. For all the gods of peoples are worthless idols. God, the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. So when we think about going to church, we think about big things, big ideas, and strength and beauty. Now, there's a perverse non sequitur to this called holiness, and that's a word called idolatry, where people don't want to give God his due, and they say, I'm going to ride my Harley today. You say, I'm not going to ride it to church. I'm just going to ride my Harley today. And so that Harley becomes an idol that takes people away from church. And I'm not picking on Harleys as secular people any more than people who take a Cadillac to the country or take their 40-year-old Ford pickup to the country. Anything can be an idol to take you away from dodging the act of worship. So we don't want to have a perversity in our life. We want to render to God the glory that he began. And so the first day of creation is the first glimpse of glory. Out of darkness there is a miracle called light. It's a miracle that there's light. Light is something that fills space instead of darkness. And I look at the cosmos and what God is using to create life, and I don't know if the prime light needed the assist of this, but the thing that I find that fills most of the cosmos is burning gas. I know we think that if a long-winded preacher is too full of gas, but think about the continual burning out in the heavens, the cosmos. It's filled with gas that burns in different temperatures, and we have clouds of green gas and blue gas and violet gas and pink and red gas, and as well as white and other forms of gas. The point is that these clouds of gas bring about light and beauty in a tapestry of black. And so that is the beginning of creation. And we would look straight up into a black sky, except God has created this earth with a blanket of gas called atmosphere, or the biblical word is firmament. And the firmament diffracts the light that comes from the heavens into a beautiful shade of blue, unless it's sunset or sunrise. Then it can be blue or gold, green, mauve, orange, flame, pink, reds. At times when the sun is at a low angle, we get all these other colors. But mainly in the middle of the day, blue skies are the sign of a great day. And yesterday, the last day of summer, was a wonderful day in Michigan. You got a lot of blue sky. Beautiful, beautiful blue sky. Now, the earth is made of water, but there's also land, and we need water, we need sky, we need the atmosphere, but our home is on the land, and so God said, all right, on the land, I'm going to create of it a garden. And so we have these beautiful wildflowers, beautiful wild places, and we have been educated to value gardens, and so where there is money, there are people who invest millions of dollars in what we call formal or man-made gardens. And we spend lots of money to go visit some of those gardens. In the east, there's something called, it's right there, the DuPont estate, Longwood Gardens. And out west, there's the Bouchard Gardens. And we have these beautiful gardens. Europe has gardens. Italians love formal gardens, and so they would design formal gardens. We sometimes like informal gardens, but the point is, it's all beautiful. And notice how when God did it, he made his garden home for us with springs and rivers and streams and gentle waterfalls, pools of water filled with fish, trees. I put this one here because we think of that, does that really count as a tree? But I'll tell you, if it's 100 degrees, you're going to want to sit in the shade of that if you have a lunch to eat. You're going to be glad for that little Joshua tree, because it's going to serve you where the maples won't even grow. The oaks don't even find enough water. And so we find trees created, and some of them appears that they're mainly created by God in His mind for beauty, as this flame tree. It's just for color. It's not particularly big. And what about this one? This one is impressive for lumber or for shade. And we think about these different kinds of trees that God has created, and we should value trees because He made them to serve humanity. And of course, then there's the smaller plants, the flowers, the shrubs. And notice that they're jewel-like in their beauty, and they attract servants of God. We call them pollinators. Some of them are butterflies and moths. Some of them are bees and wasps. But they visit these to create a cycle of pollination so that procreation in the plant kingdom continues. And every time we eat an apple, we should be thankful to the honeybee that pollinated that tree. Because it's just a little creature, but it's a servant of God, and we are dependent upon these little servants for our sustenance as well as for beauty. Now, there's fruit, and I know there's some fruit that we don't eat that birds are all over. A cedar tree with the little blueberries and things like that. We don't do too much with that. I'm not sure if this is mainly a fruit that people want, but some of them are shared, like bananas. The primates of Africa love bananas, and I visited Africa, and I just came with my own definition that the banana plant is the weed that feeds Africa, because you don't have to plant it. God planted them everywhere, and they're all over the hillsides, and the people who are deep impoverished get a very nutritious diet by eating bananas. And God looks after His creation that way, that even in America, we love bananas. Kids, sometimes they hold out for a banana in their lunchbox, but not too many freckles, right? It's got to be a fresh one. That's how most of us. But then some fruit is just seen to be packaged mainly for humans' enjoyment. Even the birds tend to leave them alone, but humans love fruits of various sorts, and they're packaged just to attract us and our Thanksgiving. Now, the fourth day, God set forth the grandeur of suns and moon and planets and stars in their glory. And they're not just mere ornaments. We visited that briefly last week when we talked about the ordinances of the sun, the ordinance of the moon that regulate the life. There are nocturnal animals and there are diurnal animals, and we usually get up with the sun. In fact, we have a saying, it's the early bird that gets what? The worm. And that's because the worms come out at night. In case you didn't know, there's a couple reasons. In the darkness, they are confused. And secondly, the moisture of the dew, they can get up on top of the grass and move about and mate and do different things that worms do. And then they have to find a hole to get back underground. But in the morning light, some of them are still trapped out of their burrow. And we know that's when the early bird gets that worm. I always wondered why we considered it sinful to go swimming on Sabbath. Because we can go on a bird walk, and we have binoculars to look for birds. Well, why don't we just put on a pair of goggles and go swimming and look for fish? That's just as much nature as birds are, except maybe we have more fun, I don't know. But the point is, I find it is wondrous to look at the majesty of the Creator's mind in life under the waters, whether it's fresh water or salt water. They're just teeming with life, and this life serves humanity. And some of them are in the shallows. There's a particular little fish called a fairy basslet. I didn't get a picture of it for you, but you can look it up on Wikipedia this afternoon. It's called a fairy basslet. It's the prettiest magenta, deep red, purple front end with a yellow tail. And you know where they're found in nature? Down between 100 and 150 feet. They're way down there. But we like to get them, try to keep them in 2 feet of water in our aquariums. And they do, they adapt to it, but their natural habitat is down 100 feet down. They like to be down in the darker waters, the cooler waters. And fairy basslet is a beautiful little fish. This is not and I say the most jewel-like birds are the smallest ones, the hummingbirds. And there are dozens of varieties of hummingbirds. Here in the east of America, we only see the ruby throat hummingbird. But they only make it through life. They can't go 12 hours without getting a meal. And so their body shuts down. It's like they hibernate every night. It's called torpor. That's a word from the nature guy. Torpor. And I had one of them. He was so low on fuel when he came to my feeding station. He took a drink and went into torpor right on the edge of my porch and spent the night. And I wanted to get up to see if I would get up soon enough to see him in the morning, but I wasn't soon enough. I got up with the crack of dawn, but he had already woken up and had flown away. But they have nature. Nature has wonderful ways to preserve life when you're a little bird and you don't have a lot going for you other than your beauty. And here's a little finch, and wish we had those around here, but we don't. We do have these, and it thinks about how there are soaring birds, there are perching birds, there are wading birds, there are swimming birds, and they're all over. And on a Sabbath afternoon, you can take a walk. And 2 days ago, it wasn't Sabbath, but I was working on my house. And I saw a majestic, huge bird. It was bigger than a turkey vulture, but it had dark brown, almost black wings. And then I looked, and the sun was shining through its tail, and it had a white tail. So then I looked to the head, and it had a white head. And there, right over my house, was a soaring bald eagle. And soaring birds are majestic, and they'll dazzle you. Most of the eagles I've seen on Sabbath. I don't know, maybe it's because I take the time to be out in nature, but God will dazzle you in nature on the Sabbath if you give him half a chance. And everything is beautiful. And I put that down on everything is beautiful because I don't know what we say about an orangutan baby. I think he's beautiful to his mama, but he looks a little comedic to us, just a little bit out of proportion. But there he is with the glamour pusses, the little leopard cubs, and they like him. So we like him too. Maybe we like him for his intelligence. We say, he's compared to some of the animals, he's nearly a genius. He's pretty bright. He just doesn't look like much. His hair hasn't come in deep enough. And of course, I don't know how you are, but there was a saying in some parts where I was growing up that you had to be a mother to love a redheaded child. I don't know, but I have a cousin who grew up red-haired, and he found a blonde-haired wife who just liked his sort of beauty, and they've been very happily married for about 20 years now. So everything is beautiful in its time. You just got to find somebody to love an orangutan. Notice how God wanted us to have respect for nature. Some of the elements in the animal kingdom they're much larger than we are. And yet it's interesting that in general, God created humankind to have dominion over all life. And so the elephants will respect humans if humans respect the elephants. You know what I'm saying? They don't willy-nilly attack humankind. They respect humans if we respect them. And so there's this wonderful order of creation where even animals larger than us will respect us if we treat them with kindness. Now, Nathan Green is a wonderful artist, but he did something unique in this painting, and that's why I selected it. He put on here some of the mathematic formulas behind life. There's some organic chemistry formulas there. There's some geometry there. We're going to expand on that. There's some other kinds of formulas there. But what I want us to think about is that it took an organized mind, a precise mind, to end up with life. Life didn't just happen. There are certain narrow parameters where life happens. And one of those narrow parameters which defines life is a principle called, see if I can see where I wrote it down, phi, P-H-I, phi, or we add the letters V-E and we get 5. So that helps us remember what phi is all about. It's about the number 5. We see a pentagram. We see a picture of a man spread across that. We see a 5-petaled flower. And then we find ratios, and we have this semi-simple mathematical equation because it's not calculus, but it involves square roots. You remember learning square roots along around 4th grade, something like that? Well, you take 0.5, which is a mathematical representation of a half, 0.5 times the square root of the number 5 plus 0.5, and we get this symbol called phi, which is 1.6180339. It's a wonderful number, and it's that compared to 1. 1.61 or 1.62 compared to 1. And then we take its inverse. We can have 0.5 times the square root of 5 minus 0.5, and that leaves us with the opposite mirror image. There's no 1 in front. It's just 0.6180339. So we have this 0.62 to 1 or 1.62 to 1, and these are ratios, and you can look at something like a 5 by 8 is a ratio, and we consider that a very pleasing ratio of proportions, which the Greeks called, after Fibonacci, the mathematician, called it the golden mean. If you wanted to have something look good, you built it according to the golden mean. Now, it's funny how when heaven designed the sanctuary, it was around the cube. The cube was the most holy place, 15 by 15 by 15 cubits. It was a cube. But here the Greeks are designing a temple around the golden mean, and here's the ruins of the Parthenon, and it was 0.61 to 1 as wide as it was long. But the Greeks knew something else too, that as things go in the distance, parallax tends to take, so that, you take railroad tracks, you look at them, they look like they get narrower and narrower and narrower. So the Greeks said, look, in order for this building to look straight, we have to actually, way up there, we have to make it just slightly wider at the top than it is at the bottom. Otherwise, it'll look like it's going narrower. So the top of the temple is actually wider than the bottom, but just enough so it looks square. Notice the precision they did with that? They made it just enough so it looks square. It's not, but it looks square because it takes into account the tricks our eyes play on us, and they made it according to the golden mean. Let's talk about people, human beauty, proportions of the face. It doesn't matter what race we're looking at. We're looking at people we think are good looking, whatever race, and we're looking now at facial proportion. We're doing this very quickly, because all of us can pick the good-looking ones out from the ones that are average-looking. And so it happens to women, it happens to men, happens to older men, older people. Notice that there's a golden section across cultural beauty where we're now drawing lines, and these lines are allowing us to see that in all these good-looking faces, their proportions are going toward the golden mean. They're put in the right place for us to say they're beautiful. Remember, we talk about Fibonacci spiral, and we have the chambered nautilus, and notice its shell is one big long spiral. But then each of its chambers, as it's growing, is also an arc of that spiral itself, so that this one we can look, I don't know if I can count them, but there's probably about 30 of those arcs that constitute the home of the chambered nautilus. But according to Fibonacci, we have 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 5 plus 8 plus 6, 13 plus 21, and we're adding the last 2 to the previous one each time to get that 1.6 to 1 kind of golden mean. It's a Fibonacci number, and here we can put it on a graph. 1 + 1 + 2. So we start up here, we start and loop to the right, and then up to the top, and then around 3 and come through the 5 and go all the way. Well, you can see we're creating a spiral if we round that out. And here I tried to get one that had the spiral the same way, but this one is flipped. So it's just a mirror with the golden mean and the rule of thirds, so that we like this picture even if the person in it is off to 1/3, way off to the right, but it looks like a well balanced picture. We didn't force that person be right in the center. It follows the golden mean, and so we put some trees off to one side to balance the woman on the right, and we think that that's a well crafted, well framed picture, and it's because of the proportions that we're looking at. Here we have that golden section of face features where we can see it as a whole head. We can then separate out the eyebrows, or the eye function, the nose function, the chin function. They're all in proportions, so that even in a silhouette, we find that people whose face follows this structure is good looking or beautiful. Now, that same spiral, some of us have seen this when we grew sunflowers. It's a great one to see that, where you look down and see all the little tiny rows of seeds growing, and you can see that it almost looks like it's a propeller moving, because your eye goes around that spiral, and it almost looks like it's moving. And we see the Fibonacci growth spiral. This is how the plant grew, and heaven ordained this. Now, it's less visible, but we take all those proportions and we color code them to proportions, and we see ratios even in animals with sort of camouflage, and we see that the dots are about the same place, the wings are in a proportion, and we find that the moth looks beautiful because it's following the law of proportionality in its features. And even the dolphin has this, the rule of thirds. It's following a slightly different rule, but it's called the rule of thirds. And so we love dolphins. We think it's a beautiful animal, but they're all proportioned. The fin is not too far back and not too forward. It's just put there where it looks right to us, that dorsal fin is in the right place. Of course, some have these succulent plants. They come by different names. I think there's one called chicken and eggs or something like that. What's it called? Hen and chicks. Yeah, the eggs have hatched. Anyway, but it's all swirled, and we can see that. But now, not everything looks like that. We have a lot of plants that look like a basil plant. Look at this basil plant. It has an axial whirl. Definitely they're going around, but it's not, let's go back. Doesn't look like this. But the numbers there are numbers that determine where that next leaf is going to show up on the stem. And we'll show you that in just a minute. That we have a rotation angle. Some plants have just 2 leaves in the rotation angle, where one is 137.5, the other one is 22.5, but others are 3 times 137.5, and so that's a triplet kind of whirl. And you can go look at plants this afternoon, flowers out on weeds along the road, and you'll see that they're growing according to one of these kind of ratios, but they're all very determined by a mathematical formula. And of course, we have some variations on the basic design, but here's the thing. We found that the Fibonacci design, the first one we talked about, which is the most common one, is the most naturally energy efficient model to add new life to existing life. So if you had to burn calories to make it happen, this is how you would burn the calories and to make it happen, and this is the result. And so we look at it's a very beautiful thing. The trees, maple trees follow this as they grow up. Conifers follow a slightly different rule, but the point is they all are following a rule of creation. And notice the Fibonacci spiral even applies to gas. It organizes even gas out in space. And we find that that Fibonacci spiral is making a very beautiful, beautiful cosmic statement about the majesty of God. Now I want to finish here with a little story about fish. I love fishing, and I try to not be join the Liars Club when I tell fish stories. But this one, you'd almost think I was a Liars Club when I tell you this story. Guys, it almost looks homely. It's not really proportionately beautiful. It has a kind of a turquoise look, and they certainly look like an agreeable couple. They're kind of kissing on each other and they're cooperating. They're not fighting. And notice that the male is an artist. I want to show you this. You notice that little red circle? That's the fish. He's about 9-10 inches long, and he's made a circle of sand into a radial piece of art. About 6 feet across. And he has a center part like a sunflower. He's got a special design there. And then he has ridges and circles. Then he does, if you look, he's got a stash in the lower left where he's picked up darker stones and shell fragments and things. And he's in the process of dropping them all around in that thing to make a completely round bicolor, as the color of the sand plus a little dark trim. And notice that the female, she's not the artist, but she's the art critic. She's the art critic. If he's sloppy, if he can't make a pretty bed like this, she won't mate with him. But if she swims over and she goes, now there is a fish I could get close to, then she mates with them and nature procreates. But notice all the energy he is giving, not to the act of sex itself, but to create beauty. Create beauty. And it's an amazing thing that these little pufferfish, who don't have much to recommend them, is they make these beautiful works of art, and all it takes is a storm or a tide or whatever, and it just erases this creation. But he is a sand artist, and he'll go for up to 3 or 4 days without eating because he wants to finish it while the tide is right or while the ocean is calm. He will do this on a time-dependent basis. And this is, to me, evidence of the glory of God. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. If you engage nature and value nature, you will value nature's God. Console those who mourn in Zion. Give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. They may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. This is heaven's destiny, that the church is meant to glorify God. The members are meant to be joy-filled, come to worship with praise. On our final slide, I just borrowed this little insight from that wonderful Christian of another era, writing in the little book, Adventist Home. You know, Adventist homes. Let all that is beautiful in our earthly home remind us of the crystal river and green fields, the waving trees, the living fountains, the shining city, the white-robed singers of our heavenly home, that world of beauty which no artist can picture, no mortal tongue describe. Let that challenge us to be the beauty of holiness in our lives. That's my final appeal. Let's sing a song of rejoicing.